Here's the crux. Few video editors ask the question about media management until they've well developed their craft. Subsequently, they've got a lot of files and bad habits that lack media management altogether. Who is this video for? This video is for video editors, sound editors, artists working with video, corporate video producers, even you bigwigs who think that you got it all figured out, working somewhere in Southern California making videos. This video is about media management and the logic of media management. It's going to be a long video. It's been a big process making this video, doing the research. The research for this video has been potentially life-changing for me. I just got off the phone with a friend of mine, friend of over 2 decades, most of my life I've known this lady, who is a brilliant library scientist. She rocked my world. I came to her asking about what kind of taxonomy system I should suggest for video files and video management. And I was really hoping she would kind of just have this canned response of this system that everybody should be using but nobody is using, specifically in naming conventions of a video file. She didn't give me that answer. She gave me more. And I'll tell you exactly what she said toward the end of this video. But first, let's go back to who this video is for and what is media management. Anybody who's working with video or photos or sound, YouTube producers, sound producers, musicians, anybody who uses a computer. This video is sort of for you, but it's going to sway toward video, specifically managing video. Some of these things are no-brainers if you ask the right question. Unfortunately, what I've found in my cursory research for media management for video editors is a whole bunch of bad solutions, non-solutions, bad answers, non-systems, nonsense, blind leading the blind. Wow. Most people, I would say, have very little media management, and they rely entirely on, I don't know, intuition. What are they? The status quo? What is it? Here's the thing. Media management is the storage and labeling of media files within an organizational system. Sounds pretty dry, pretty bleak. Here's the good news. If you're using a computer, you already have an organizational system, which is the computer. Most of us have access to the organizational system of the operating system. Either Mac, you would call it Finder, and on Windows, you would call it a window. But there's other organizational systems that interface with this computer, which are physical systems like a hard drive or a cloud. And sometimes there's physical systems like the media itself, the film stock or the tape if you're working on that, or the SD card if you're recording digitally to an SD card. Before I get too much into this question of organizational systems, here's a best practice for hard drives. I'm laughing because I know this is going to provoke some controversy, but let me take a quick swing at it. If you're editing a video, you should have a drive exclusively for writing and rendering. What do I mean by that? This is like a scratch drive. I think traditionally people understand that there's an internal hard drive to almost every computer. And then there are external drives that are peripherals that you connect via some cable, USB, USB-C, FireWire previously. Traditionally, the idea was that you would store your media files, the footage that you're reading from, as well as what you're writing to, on an external drive, and that your software would be based on the internal drive. I'd actually push this a step further. I would say you should be reading from one drive, that's an external drive. You should have your software on the internal drive, or potentially in the cloud in the future. And you should be writing to a separate external drive. I'm not going to go into too much detail about brands and which options you have for external drives. I know LaCie was a very popular video editing external hard drive about 10 years ago. I played with it. It's fine. I'm not endorsing it. I would actually endorse even less proprietary measures. I would endorse just having a hard drive. This is the most basic a consumer can get. This is a 3.5 internal hard drive that I use as a scratch disk. And rather than putting this inside of an enclosure like LaCie or any of these other brands that are touting the best for video editing, I just put this inside. I'm going to cover up the name. Just a dock. The great thing about this is the drive dies or you need a different drive, you just take the drive out. Also, these docks tend to be fairly inexpensive, so when the interface changes, this you can easily update. This is like 20 bucks. I'm trying not to promote this brand. It's USB-C. Previously, I had this brand, which I'm also going to cover, this model, which is a similar dock. You could see you could drop the drive directly into this baby, like back in the day when video games had cartridges. And then you would connect this to old school USB or eSATA, which was great cable that usually does not get used these days. You could also put in a 2.5, and these are also increasingly becoming obsolete as storage and speeds improve on other smaller forms of media. But yeah, this is a what used to be called a laptop drive, smaller form factor. I think it's 2.5 millimeters. Yeah, I mean, the great thing about these is they're getting increasingly cheap. The bad thing is they have mechanical moving parts, so if you drop it, it can break. Now, why would I say have one of these kind of stripped down hard drives as a scratch disk? When you edit video, as you become more sophisticated in it, you're going to burn out hard drives. And so, yeah, unfortunately, these are going to end up in the recycling. Now, when it does burn out, it's not a big crisis because theoretically, the software that you're editing in that's generating these previews can just rewrite it. You just generate an optimized proxy or something like that. If you're in DaVinci or create a preview, if you're in After Effects, if this drive dies, you get another one, you press render, it'll write to that drive. The lifespan of this drive will vary on what kind of editing you do, but also the type of software you use. Personally, I've found DaVinci Resolve burns out my drives much faster than After Effects. But some of these I've used for years, which have been fine. They're also a great thing to use when the storage capacity doesn't make much sense for an internal hard drive anymore. So for example, this is 500 gigabytes, which is sort of, I would say, the bare minimum for personal computing today. But it's a lot of space if you're just writing to it. If you're just writing previews, caching files here, that's actually a lot in 2021. Also, the nature of these renders and previews is such that if you do run out of space, you could delete them and it will delete the old ones, and then you can just render the most current previews to this drive. Now, we've talked about the external write drive. What about the external read drive? Okay, so you have the footage that you're working from on an external drive, and I think probably the most common external drive would be one of these portable drives. You've seen these around. They're pretty inexpensive, somewhere around, I don't know, a terabyte for $60. The idea of it being called a portable drive is that you carry it from one place to the other. Maybe you don't carry it anywhere though, but it is actually better to have this separated as an external drive rather than inside your machine. Even if you have a machine that has multiple drives, it's just easier to have this be connected via a peripheral port like USB-C or USB 3, especially since the read speeds are actually pretty fast nowadays. You know, if you're using an older computer, maybe you want those SATA cables on the inside and you actually don't mind taking the door off of your tower and replacing one of these desktop drives and have that be a read from hard drive. But I've found these to be fine. Here's the next thing I would suggest. If your media is something that you cannot afford to lose, your read drive should actually be a RAID array. RAID stands for Redundant Array of Independent Drives, and hopefully we're coming to the end of needing RAID because we're moving toward cloud computing. But until we do, a RAID box is an enclosure like this, which is, again, I'm not going to advertise this brand, but you can see on the back we've got a fan and we've got a few input-output ports. And essentially you can open this up. Man, I never took this plastic off. You have different bays. And the way this works is that these two drives they're merged rather as a single drive, which makes it larger in capacity, by this bay. And then all of the data that's on this merged drive is mirrored to this. This allows basically any one of these 4 drives to fail mechanically and will notify you, and then you can replace this drive, the failing drive, with a new drive so that you don't lose any of your data. Again, hopefully we're coming to the end of the need for RAID enclosures, but yeah, for kind of smaller individual projects or small studios that don't maybe want to work on a server, a RAID is a good solution because it still offers pretty fast data transfer speeds while offering one solution to keep your files secure because they're redundant. Now, here's the other thing. Obviously, if you have a flood or a fire, it doesn't do you much good if you have all the drives in one place. So it's actually best to have it backed up also on the cloud. If you put a file on one of these hard drives, it gets copied to a second hard drive, and then you have it in a third place, which is the cloud. I'm always hoping and talking about the future of video editing being something that takes place mostly on the cloud, both from the software interface, but also from the data. I can see, the cloud has huge benefits for redundancy, but right now the read speeds and the write speeds just are not there. So for that reason, the hard drive is still necessary for people who are editing videos. Okay, so we've talked about media management and what it is, the best practice of storing and using hard drives, storing data and using these hard drives. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of blowback as to people suggesting, well, why are you reading from your RAID? You should actually have your data on a separate external hard drive to read from, not from the archival backup. That's not a bad idea. Actually, I've been using this RAID enclosure for 3 or 4 years, and previously I had a smaller RAID, which I'm going to go to. Again, I'm going to cover this up. And I outgrew this RAID. Let's talk a second about the lifespan of these hard drives that go in these RAIDs. Invariably, you're going to run out of space on it. And then what do? What I've done is I buy 4 more drives that are twice the size. Then I use I copy all the data to the new drives, and then I use the old drives as scratch disks. So this 500 gigabyte drive actually used to be inside of this old 2-bay enclosure. And then as you toast this, it finds itself to the recycling, which probably gets sent somewhere in Africa where people will disassemble this or maybe burn it and try to extract the precious metals and then sell that to whichever individuals are manufacturing with that current metal. Dire. This is a dire lifespan, and try to avoid the consumption of these when possible. The cloud. The cloud obviously takes some burden out of this, but we're just not there yet, unfortunately. Okay, let's get back to the bigger topic of media management. Why is media management important? Okay, let me show you something. There are a lot of ways to describe what video editing is. Some might describe it as magic. Some might describe it as sense. Some might describe it as mimicking biological processes like blinking. These are all nice. They're kind of spooky, though. They're kind of metaphysical. And I think that they're also too ambitious. They're also not entirely useful for most of the ways that people actually edit video. The most basic description of what video editing is media management. When you take away all of this spooky stuff about how to make, the best film like Apocalypse Now or what you're actually really doing is you're managing media. You're managing within the editor software. You're managing how it appears, what files go after which file. But also, you're managing where those files exist prior to and after going in that editor. So video editing, and I would say probably sound editing, and a lot of the things that we do on a computer are really just forms of media management. And the question is more aptly, what kind of media do we work with, and what kind of media do we export when we're done working with that? Phenomenologically, video editing is media management. Sorry, Walter, but that's the reality. And when we ask ourselves what we have to do, what is the lifespan of this piece of media from the moment that it's captured in a camera to the moment that it's seen or heard by somebody, there are some very clear steps. One of the steps is when it is in the storage media, like a SD card or on film. The next step is when it becomes digitized or is on the computer. There's some cameras, actually, and even audio devices that do allow you to, create some kind of naming convention on your file as you're recording it. But most people are going to find themselves first interacting in a meaningful way with their media on their computer, or maybe on a cloud through a computer or on a phone, maybe on a tablet. I mean, all of these places are essentially the same. It's a physical interface for the digital world. And the next time that you're going to be meaningfully interacting with this as a video editor is inside the video editing software on the NLE, the nonlinear editor. But there's another time before we talk about watching it on a screen or listening to it in our headphones. There are other times, parallel times, future selves, yourself, when you re-encounter this media, when maybe another collaborator somewhere else who's either working simultaneously or in the future has to encounter this media. And how do they understand the system that you as the author, as the media manager, have put in place? There are some software that have tried to address this. You can think of Adobe Bridge as a media management software. You can even think about Google's Picasa as media management for photos. There's tons of others, actually, and they're always being introduced. And I would point to Bridge and Picasa as good examples, powerful examples, as to why not to use a media manager software or platform beyond your operating system. If we look at those, Google and Adobe being two of the biggest companies in the world, they both killed they both killed their software, which means that people put a lot of labor into learning and using those user interfaces, and now it's gone. If you had like all of your videos, photos, Adobe files neatly stored in Adobe Bridge? Good luck. You can't access that anymore. And same with Picasa, which is now essentially Google Photos. But yeah, there was all kinds of taxonomical things in Picasa that you simply can't use anymore. Rather than getting one of these media managing softwares, which I almost guarantee is going to go out of business in the next 5 years, do future you a favor and actually do the media management on the lowest level possible, which, as I said, is currently the personal computing operating system. There's another reason why you want to manage your media. It's saving time. Saving time, reviewing your footage. Future you reviewing your footage, relinking your footage, finding files. If you're working for a client, time is money. And when you start implementing a taxonomy to your workflow, you realize how much time it takes. And this can really, really help you when you're estimating how long a project requires, from both, the moment when you begin your pre-production to the moment that you're delivering a draft. It certainly is going to impact what you would bid for if you're talking with somebody. If somebody comes to you and says, I have this footage from my wedding that I would love to have you edit, or footage from an opening that I would love to have you edit, how much are you going to charge? You probably need to keep in mind that this person, as nice as they are, they probably did not do any naming or management of their files. You're going to have to do that, and it's going to take time. Implementing and understanding media management is crucial to working efficiently and effectively. When do you need to start? When do you need to start? This video is so long. I apologize. You've got to watch this, but this is such a massive beast, and there's so much bad information out there. When do you need to do media management? This is a question of when does editing really begin, and I think it depends on what kind of work you're doing. If you're doing a video production, you could really start your media management from the moment when you start planning the actual video. That could be, shooting in a certain order. It could also be, writing your media, even using one of these. The reason that people write this, it's media management. This is all media management, which I forgot to do. For most people, though, the useful idea to remember is that video editing begins when the camera stops, and media management should begin at that time also. Before you open your editor, manage your media. Why? Because once it's in the editor, if you manage your media afterward, obviously you're going to create a problem for your video editor to find those files. Do this as soon as you get your storage media, as soon as you get the hard drive that the video is stored on, or the SD card, or you download it from their cloud. Before you open any application, edit first in Finder if you're on a Mac, a window if you're in a Windows machine, and that's going to begin with creating folders and file names. I'm going to pause right here. The next thing you do after you implement this naming convention and taxonomical media management, the next thing you do is you back up the files. So you get the file, you name it, you change the names, then you drag it to your backup. As I said, either RAID, external drive, or on the cloud. Obviously, because you don't want to have to write all of those names twice. Okay? Another time when you're going to want to really think about media management is as you work. Particularly right now when there's constantly software updates that can break your software. if you make the mistake of leaving auto updates on and the software breaks, or you find that you've upgraded to a public beta that isn't really up to snuff, you want to be able to go back and get the data that you've had in that video editor. So while you're editing, you should be regularly exporting XML files. Okay, what is that? These are like XML files are a markup file that is a non-proprietary file that you can open with similar results to similar editing software. What do I mean by that? If you were working in, let's say, Final Cut, and do they still even offer XML export? I'm not sure. Final Cut 7, you export an XML, then you can open that in Adobe Premiere. Or you could even open that in a future version of Final Cut. And they will have similar edits, as much that can translate as possible, like folder file structures, things like that. Obviously, if one software offers a feature that another one doesn't, that column of edits is not going to be able to be imported. But XML files are really, really important if you're returning to a project 5 years after you did it, which actually has happened to me a few times. Okay, the other time when you really need to be cognizant of media management is when you decide that the project is coming to an end. What I mean by that is you're thinking about the archival lifespan of this media. This includes exporting sort of open source, non-proprietary formats. XML is something I mentioned already, but also you might consider outputting a final draft of your video that is in a non-proprietary or archival format. If you're really, really going crazy, we're talking about DCP file format. This is, crazy archival digital cinema package. This is where they're essentially converting every frame of a video into an open source TIFF or JPEG, JPEG 2000. But the idea here is not only to create sort of as near lossless format as possible, but also to avoid these questions of software obsolescence. So you don't want to be exporting to a known proprietary format. Even, strange things like an MOV file, which is the Apple movie file. You'll notice that if you try to open one that was made, on a previous OS X, often QuickTime will have to convert it. And when they do that, it becomes usually a larger file. Take a look at proprietary file formats and open source file formats, and always try to work more toward open source and as few proprietary file formats as possible. Now we're going to get to some kind of crazy, this is the life-changing part. Before I say what you should do, I'm going to say what you should not do. You should not leave your media files with the naming convention that came out of the camera. I can't stress this enough. This is like borderline human rights violation. If you open a project or a computer and you have all of these files, it's like p69311115.mov, dvi underscore 1096751 This is horrible, and this is a nightmare. It's very difficult to search those and locate those files by, a normal human brain. Nobody can remember those names. It's also very difficult when you're inside an editor to make any sense of what those mean. So don't do that. Don't do that. The other question that is a serious question is you probably don't want to forget the scope of the project, including the audience. Meaning, you can go crazy in pursuing these taxonomical classification, categorical perfection. It's probably not necessary in most cases. There's also this question that you probably don't want to change your file format or your media management in the middle of a project. You might be even be borderline obsessive compulsive like myself and want to go back and fix previous projects. Try to avoid doing that. The reason is that you can just open more cans of worms than it's actually worth. So if, for example, if you're making a short video, if you're making a wedding video, or you're making like a fun video that you plan on putting on social media, that's, consider what it is. It's probably a sort of borderline throwaway video. You really want to like use only the sparest amount of your time to go through that. Now, as I said, the thing you don't want to do is just leave your files unnamed, and you don't want to just dump all of your videos on your desktop or in the movies folder. That's like a nightmare of mine. But you also don't want to go in too crazy. You know, I'm looking for this video or doing research for this video. I was thinking about even like having, instituting a Library of Congress or a Dewey Decimal System to my file naming conventions. What I will say is that most of the time, the digital media, let's call them assets for a moment, that you use are going to be used either for 0, 1, or a series of projects. What I mean by that is, like, you might have a sound effects folder that you're regularly drawing from, and every project that you have has, I don't know, the sound of birds in the background. So if that's the case, you actually don't want every single movie in that series to have a copy of that sound effect. You want it to be broader so that you're sharing that, right? You're sharing that asset across multiple projects. The reason you don't want to have it in multiple places is that, first of all, it takes up storage space, but it'll be difficult also to manage that media in the future, because you might have to, you do a search and you find 25 files of the bird noise. Thinking about the kind of worst case scenario here. Okay, so you have these projects, and many times a digital asset is going to be applicable only to one project. If that's the case, that's almost kind of easy if you just create some logic. And this logic is usually, as we said in the operating system taxonomy, you have a folder, you name the folder, which is probably the name of the project, and then inside that folder you have either a folder that separates your media or all of the media that you're using. I would say, and here's something, traditionally I had all of my folders within a project that were divided by video, audio, special effects, and sound effects. And I'm going to say, get rid of that. Don't do that. I'm going to stop doing that. Starting now, I'm going to stop doing that. And the reason I would say that is that for a video editor software, there's really only two ways to manipulate data, and there's two ways to organize data and two ways to manipulate data. In a video editing software today, you basically treat photos and videos in the same way. The ways that you can manipulate them are the same tools. That's on the video track, right? And then you have the lower track, which is the audio track, and you manipulate your sound effects and recorded audio in the same way. You have the same filters that are applicable to that. Now, granted, there are sort of file formats that are shared between applications, like Premiere is sharing a After Effects composition, and you can manipulate that After Effects composition in more ways within After Effects, but within Premiere, it's treated as a video, and if it has audio files, an audio track. So I would say have all of the media that's treated in one way, in one folder. You might just call it visual or V-track or video track. If that video might be confusing because if you put in a photo, you might expect that to exist not in a video folder. But certainly this question of like sound effects, if it's specific to that project and not in a separate kind of more general sound effects folder, sound effects and recorded audio can exist in the same folder of just being called audio. Even things like what would be considered sort of non-time-based, text-based, media like a Illustrator file or can you put a PDF in Premiere? You probably can. Those are treated as video, right? So let's talk about so we've got within the video editor, right? But we haven't actually talked about how you should name your files and folders. One, consider your audience. Is the working media something only you're using? If so, feel free to come up with whatever file naming convention you follow. I will tell you that until this video, I was very, very dedicated to the chronological as a prefix, and then I would have the file name. I will say there are a couple things that you should not do when naming a file for video editing or in general on a computer. Don't have a space. When I say a space like this, don't put this in your file name, because when you put that on the cloud, it becomes a disaster to find that path name. You've probably seen it if you try to open something with a space, like with a hyperlink or something, it creates this percentage sign and then maybe a 20 or whatever. Don't do that. If you're going to separate something visually for the benefit of being able to distinguish with your eyes where one part of syntax ends and the next part begins, use an underscore or a dot. As I said, the example of my naming system is the year, month, day, in that order. No spaces, no slashes, no dots. Today's February 13th, 2001. So if I were making this video, which I am, it's 20210213 underscore and then the name of the video. The name is the body in the center. As I alluded to earlier, I use suffix and prefixes and suffixes as well as a body. Sometimes when you copy a file from one hard drive to another, the creation and modify date is not actually carried from that original hard drive to the new hard drive, and instead it will tell you what the new date is on that new hard drive, which is the date you copied. So then it's no longer useful. So then if you copy thousands of projects that are shot over different years all at once from one hard drive to another, they're all going to have the same creation date. So then that sorting mechanism is not really useful. And for that reason, I do include the name, the chronological chronology in the prefix. It's up to you. You can do it. Now suffixes are useful, obviously, to describe something in a series or a sequence. Cat attacks dog 1, cat attacks dog 2, cat attacks dog 3, cat attacks dog 4 and 5. How many times the cat attacked the dog? But there's other things that you should include, or you could include, in the naming conventions of a video. This kind of goes toward editing conventions. Usually you don't cut from a static shot to a pan or a tilt shot. A video that has a tilt or a pan usually has these ends where they're not tilting or panning. And this allows you to be able to do whatever you want. If you need that shot as a static shot, without a tilt or pan, you can use either the what do they call it? I don't know, heads or tails or something. but it also allows you to cut from a static shot to the static part of the tilt or pan, and then the tilt or pan begins. I'm sure there's going to be people who say, of course, there's a lot of great videos that have these cuts going on. But if you do watch this, you'll notice it's kind of weird, especially if you're doing like a cross dissolve between two shots. It is kind of weird seeing a static shot that's cross dissolving with something that's moving. It just looks wrong. And maybe it's only wrong because, I don't know, what do you think, Walter Merch? Why is that wrong? Another convention that people often follow is frequently you don't cut from a mid shot to a mid shot on the same subject. What does that mean? If you have 3 cameras set up and you've got mid, I can't even imagine why somebody would do this, but maybe they have. You've got mid camera this angle and then mid camera that angle, and then you've got another camera that's kind of tighter on it. You probably don't cut from this mid to this mid. You probably would cut to a mid on another topic, another subject, like the person that they're talking with, or you would cut away, or you would cut to a tighter or wider. What I'm saying is, with these video files, it becomes useful if you actually write in the file name what that shot has in it to some extent. And again, I use like the pan, the mid, the close-up, or the wide. And this is useful not only when you're looking on your operating system in your file folders which shot to use, but when you're actually in the editor and you say, okay, I'm on this mid shot and I know there's like 6 shots of this cat, a cat attacking the dog, and I don't want to cut from a mid to a mid, and rather than have to open every single one of these video clips to find the close-up of the cat attacking the dog, you can just look and it says right in the file name close-up, then you open that and you select the part that you want. The conventions that I follow is that I actually put the suffix of the file name to have the camera format, or the shot type rather. So again, if for this shot, this is kind of a mid shot, I guess, of me, and the file name would be 2021 0213 _ babbling about media management _ mid, right? And that's describing this shot right now. Getting meta. Okay, on the topic of meta, this is what blew my mind today, and actually I don't even know how long this video has been going on, 30 minutes or something. This is what blew my mind today. I'm talking to this library scientist. Everything that I want to put in a file name is actually not very useful. This is an argument to limit your file naming and file naming convention. And the reason is that a lot of these conventions, like Library of Congress, were developed for media that and search methods that are outdated. So in a library, as my librarian friend told me, there used to be 3 card catalogs for every item in the library. One would be the author, one would be one of the topics, kind of a general topic it was about, and I didn't hear the third thing that she'd said, but there were multiple card entries for the same thing, and today we have computers that can search for us, and probably in the future this computer will actually be much better searching and understanding what we're looking for. And so the real magic of sorting, filtering, finding is in the metadata, and specifically the tags. In video editing, metadata can mean 2 things. The metadata that you actually log in the video editor, or the metadata of the file itself. And I'm going out on a branch here, but I'm making a suggestion that the metadata should be written in a tag in a text document. Metadata for video also exists when it's in its final home, in its final resting place YouTube or a university catalog, and you want to have your metadata tags be as flexible and reusable as possible. You have, for every file you have in your video, if you intend to search for it later, you should have a text file. This is kind of what an XML is supposed to do, but it doesn't really work this way. A text file, not a rich text file, .txt file. You can open it anywhere. It's friendly across different operating systems. So you have the file name of your file, and then you have a text file of the exact same file name, such that it sits next to that same file. You open up that text file and you write all of the tags that you want, separated by a comma. Then you save that file, and when you open your video editor, you copy and paste all of your tags from that text file into your video editor. And then when you export your video, you copy and paste all of the tags for your final video project. You copy and paste that into whatever catalog system that video is going to be living in. If it's YouTube, then you just paste all of your tags. This allows you to be writing tags that are useful for search, both for finding and editing video footage, but also finding actual final drafts. Okay, so this is something I haven't actually done yet, but I think it's brilliant. And here's the rationale for it. The rationale is the file naming convention itself is a technology that's quickly dying. And tags and keywords are the future. And not only are they the future, but they're in many ways already the present. Now the question is, how do you tag? You should tag not only about the content itself, like cat, comma, dog, comma, animals, comma, fight, but you should also tag about the media, who made it, when was it made, where was it made, what camera was used, what are the themes that this content is about. These, again, are serious questions you have to answer based on, how deep you want to go into this. I've been pretty lazy on tags in my life, to be honest. For my operating system, the tags are very limited. For things online, I usually just do like 3 to 5 tags, just enough to show that I know what tags are. But the dream, I guess, is in the near future, machine learning, computers, AI, will be able to not only read these tags, but analyze the images and do a much better job delivering what it is that we or other machines are asking. And so if I were to say, show me the video of the cat and the dog fighting, it's going to show all of these masterpieces. Or maybe even it'll be able to read the audio, be able to hear me talking cat and dog fighting, and deliver this audio recording from this video. Oh, here's one thing I've got to say about audio. This is like, you have to name your audio clips, especially if it's like more than 1 minute or 10 seconds. There's nothing worse than sitting and going through every audio clip and trying to understand what it is that you're hearing and what was the point of it. Sometimes recordings are so bad, or it's not clear what the purpose of that clip is. As soon as you finish recording audio, you should begin naming it. Do the listener in the future, or who could even be yourself, a favor. Really kind of describe what it is that is being recorded. If you can, even describe how it's intended to be used. Okay, so we've covered a lot. We've covered a lot of stuff here. One thing that I had not always included in my naming convention was an export folder. I usually called that a drafts folder. Export folder sounds good because you actually are going to export a lot of things. As I said, not just the final draft of a video or the final recording or final mix of a recording, but you should also have these exports of XMLs and or other open source versions that allow you to be agile as technology evolves and dies and emerges. I've also seen some people suggest writing like a final draft, as labeling a video as a final draft. Personally, I don't ever believe there are final drafts. I would say, naming what that video is with a suffix of the date and maybe even the time, if you're doing multiple iterations, is more useful. Just because I've had, if you're delivering things to somebody, or even looking at things yourself, you're going to see differences, and you don't want to have to re-delete a final draft and then like rechange a final draft and rename one file as final draft. There's no such thing as a final draft. There's no such, videos don't get finished, they just get released, as I've heard some people brilliantly say. But I do think having a suffix of a date and maybe even a time is very useful. Wherever that video file is going to live ultimately, be it another person's computer or on the cloud or YouTube, you can change the name there. But for your own sanity, don't write things as the purported final draft. Whatever organizational structure you have within your computer should be the same as within the video editor. And what do I mean by that is, if you have your project folder, that should be the same as the project name, because the project file of After Effects or Premiere is essentially a folder, right? And then within that, if you have video assets, as I call them, and then audio assets, you should have that same folder within the project itself. And the reason is, often you need to relink or relocate or find media that is being referenced within your editor somewhere on your computer or hard drive. The experience of that is something like you click relink or relocate, and then there's a window that opens up and it shows you the previous path, the previous location, separated by slashes, username slash, external hard drive slash project slash videos slash catdog1.mov, and you have to tell it where the new location is. Perhaps in the future this will be solved by some fancy computer engineers and artificial intelligence, but as it happens now, you actually want to kind of help yourself know where these assets are. So the more you can mirror what is happening in your operating system within the video editor, the more you'll know, okay, I know out of these 75 files, this existed within the audio folder, so it's within the same audio folder on my Finder. Okay, here's another thing. Don't create a system that you can't understand later. Don't create a system that somebody else can't understand. There needs to be some logic. And don't put an underscore or an asterisk, or I don't even know if you can do that, or a period or a zero at the beginning of a file or folder name so that it populates at the top of your window when you open it. And here's the example. You've got a projects folder and you open it, and then you have one that's called underscore YouTube, because otherwise, if you didn't put the underscore there, YouTube would be toward the end of the alphabetization, and you would have to click reverse alphabetize to put it toward the top. If you're using that kind of workaround, you probably don't have a functioning media management system involved. So that's a big flag. If that is the case, I would suggest either creating a chronological system or even coming up with better general category before putting something inside of YouTube folder. So you've been video editing, and you haven't been doing any of these file naming media management conventions, and you've been pulling your hair out. Yeah, I can understand that. I can say that moving into the tags is probably the best long-term solution. Having this tagging happen both on your file, having tagging happen within the editing software, having tagging happen ultimately whatever catalog your media lives in. But you could also just rename a lot of folders and files on your operating system. And one thing that I've used in the past that's proved pretty helpful is Automator. Automator allows you to batch process a lot of files, beginning with the naming. I have this set up where it's year, month, day, separated by an underscore. I can run this workflow within a folder, selecting all the files, and then go through and append those file names with better descriptions that are visually helpful for me. And that might be cat dog underscore mid. I'm going to share a link to this workflow if you'd like to download it and use it if you're using a Mac. But also Finder lets you rename things, multiple renames, just by selecting multiple files and saying rename multiple files. The downside is that you're going to have to type out the year and this format every time. And you could make edits to this to whatever naming convention you have, which could include, having series or something like that. So, all right, I'm going to wrap this video up. It's gone on really long. I apologize. And it's going to be rough. This is too long for me to edit too much into this. But what we learned is, one, never leave a file unnamed. Name your file. Two, while file naming is important, it's actually not the end-all be-all. Particularly in the future, you need tags. And three, we did talk about how to avoid losing your media. Don't forget, at the beginning of this video, we talked about RAID arrays, external hard drives, and cloud storage. So I think these are the big takeaways. Definitely have some system for media management in place. Some bad system may be better than no system at all. Best is have like a thoughtful system, and do think about the time that you're putting into it, but also in the future, at what time you access this stuff. So this is it for today's video. Massive. Again, I apologize, but hey, I had to tell somebody, and you were that person. So thanks. Take care. Be well. Love talking to you. Bye.